it's really great to see everybody here. I'm really grateful for the people that have been carrying the torch for the last 2 years, because I haven't been doing it. So especially a shout out to Aricto for continuing it and driving it forward. And I think one of the most gratifying things for me is seeing that sort of change in leadership, because I think that sort of validates the premise that it really is a community that can survive if you can survive that sort of change of leadership. So really pleased to see that. So thank you all very much.
I think,
and David's online right now too. David, do you want to say hello right quick?
Hey everyone, I'm so sorry I couldn't be there in person. I really appreciate, basically everyone here, Josh and Amber for pulling it all together and for being, helping to restart what I think is an incredibly important community. Jeremy for like carrying the torch for as long as he did, on his back, carrying so much of the engineering. And then, of course, all the people who are not here, or who aren't on stage right now, who, exactly like Jeremy said, really like brought this forward to a really significant community. Even now, I don't want to beat up on Josh, but even Josh, like, understated with those numbers, understated it. Like, one thing that I've been at several large companies and talking about the things. They're like, well, look, Kubeflow looks like it's dying. Like, look at the core repo. It has so few contributors or movement. And I'm like, no, this is a good thing. Like, each repo is itself like grown much larger. Like, we have 261 in the main repo, but we have 330 in pipelines by itself. Contributors and so on and so forth. So it's, obviously there's some overlap there, but like that just shows how big and growing we are as a community. Stars are not the best model, but I think that contributors and forks, people participating in Slack, there's so much activity out there, and it's just up to all of us who care about Kubeflow and want it to live, to bring it forward. And it really is all of you in the community that are helping us do it.
so, David and Jeremy, I don't know which one wants to pick up on this one, but when you initially envisioned Kubeflow, why did you do this, right? I mean, why did you spend so much time on this?
Yeah, so I mean, I think the way that Kubeflow started was sort of organically. We were building a machine learning service at Google called Cloud ML Engine, which would eventually become Cloud AI Platform now. Although actually, I think they've rebranded it. Vertex. Okay. So at the time, we were following traditional Google Cloud practices and sort of building a lot of Borg infrastructure. But I think after we built sort of the initial version, we were actually running on Kubernetes, but the control plane was not running on Kubernetes. We were just running the user code on Kubernetes. And we saw sort of the opportunity to move more of that control plane into Kubernetes via a controller, a custom resource, which at the time was relatively new. Like, they were still called third-party resources, I think, at the time. But I think so that became the TensorFlow job controller, which combined with some of the other work that some other folks had been doing. A gentleman, Anirudh, had been working with notebooks on Kubernetes, and then Vishnu had been working on getting GPUs working with Kubernetes. And so those three pieces sort of came together and became like the core piece of what would become Kubeflow. But I think like the broader trend that we sort of saw was, I've been seeing Kubernetes kind of evolve, and from the early days when there was container VM, and we built container VM into Dataflow, which was where I was working before Cloud ML Engine. And I sort of saw that like Kubernetes was going to change how we were going to run ML workloads and just workloads in general. So I think nowadays, if you look at all sort of distributed compute infrastructure, legacy systems like Kafka, Spark, they're all kind of migrating to building operators to run them on Kubernetes. And I think if you're building a distributed system today, you'd probably be building it natively to run on Kubernetes and leverage that as your infrastructure. So I think we rode that wave of like the workloads migrating to Kubernetes and in timing with the ML workloads.
Yeah, I don't have a lot to add to that. Jeremy did all the hard work. My background was I had led Kubernetes for 3 years at Google, and I thought and do think that ML is the future, and Jeremy had already done all the hard work. Jeremy and Vish had already done all the hard work. I just kind of showed up and said like, oh, wouldn't it be nice if we could have the same kind of declarative ML pipelines and ML infrastructure on top of Kubernetes that Kubernetes kind of unlocked for so many other app developers. And so our goal was just to make it easy to deploy and run at the start. For those that were there at the early days, we didn't even have a pipeline to start. It wasn't until 6 months plus later that we actually had pipelines. So it really was just help people declaratively deploy ML, reusing the infrastructure that for better or worse had won in Kubernetes to achieve that. And since then the community's obviously just taken it and run.
So, I mean, I don't know about the folks in the room, but I can tell you, I personally have met so many people and talked about so many interesting applications. And it's just been a really fun journey to be involved. I'm wondering, Jeremy, David, do you have any stories that perhaps you could share about, something that enlightened you and excited you as you were on your Kubeflow journey?
I mean, I think the thing that I've noticed most is just the how rapidly the infrastructure landscape is expanding and how confusing it is becoming. So I think that to me is like the central sort of challenge, I think, from a user perspective, right? Like, I mean, it's crazy to me how many people continue to build job schedulers and pipeline systems, and not that there's not enough to iterate on, but like from a user perspective, it's like very, very confusing and very challenging. And so I think that's I think if you're building infrastructure tools today, that's I think the key point to be very cognizant of, and you have to be very crisp about what your value proposition is and like what problem you're solving is. Because I've spent the past year and a half now being on the other side, so being a company trying to build applications and value on top of ML infrastructure, and so not directly building ML infrastructure as the product. And so I've seen what that landscape is like, and it's crazy, and you don't necessarily have a lot of resources to build out those solutions. So I have I think a more customer empathy now, having been on the other side for a little bit.
Right. Jeremy's point is such a good one. The thing that I guess I've seen most of all that is, I don't know, more than a little surprising is that there hasn't been anything, even with Kubeflow, and as much as I love it, like you would have expected that there would have been something else that came along that kind of like supplanted it or whatever. And yet Kubeflow continues to grow and continues to like get so much attention. That's not to say there aren't other things that solve other problems, right? I think that particularly in the model tracking, the SDK layer and so on, I think there's some fantastic opportunities that have come out and built on top of like these concepts. ML flow certainly pops to mind, but there are lots of other ones in the space as well. But they're all focused at that data scientist, data analyst layer, which again is critical. Like we need those layers, but really no one has come along and said like, oh, you know what, actually, sure, Kubeflow is harder to deploy than it should be, and kind of complex to upgrade, and the documentation is not phenomenal, but like for better or worse, it solves this job in this really powerful way, and it lets me as exactly as Jeremy said, as a end user, a consumer of this stuff, go focus on other things, and that is just continues to really shock me, and just shows how big our opportunity is to continue to expand as a platform and make it great.
Well, good. We're about ready for Vinay. I don't know, Amber, if you have his slides about ready to go. Before we close up here on this portion, Jeremy or David, do you have any kind of strategic or, you know, kind of thoughts for the community that you might want to?
I mean, I guess one thing that I'm continuing to notice, and I'm sort of very surprised about, because I would have predicted the opposite, is AI is continuing to advance at a blistering pace. That in of itself is not necessarily surprising to me, but I think what's very surprising to me is that how much of the latest AI technology is open sourced, and how quickly it's open sourced, right? So I think, you know, my prediction a couple of years ago, you know, when sort of OpenAI changed their business model from being like a 501(c)(3), from being like a purely nonprofit to being some sort of semi-hybrid system, is that, you know, companies would stop open sourcing their latest AI tech, and just because it was getting so expensive to build these latest models. But that doesn't seem to have been, I mean, in part that seems to have been true. Some of the bigger companies have slowed down. You know, like Google and I think OpenAI don't open source as much of their model weights and whatnot. But it seems like if you look at like Stable Diffusion, other companies have like filled the void. At the same time, I still think like there's this growing chasm between, you know, the problems that these models are solving and the business problems customers have. And I think there's a huge problem trying to actually cross that chasm and solve the business problems that companies have. And, you know, they don't have the know-how to actually turn these, you know, NLP techniques or AI generative techniques into actual solutions for business problems.
I think that's a really great thing as well. What I would say is, and this is in a slight answer to one of the comments in chat. One of the things that I saw with Kubernetes that was so powerful was how aggressively we tried to stay inside the box. We basically said, look, if you want to handle things that are outside our core competency, we're going to build very clean interfaces for you to achieve that. But and potentially even, you know, we'll ship in a way that makes it very, very easy to extend. You know, that's where a lot of stuff around CRDs came from, certainly Helm and the partnerships they have there. But Kubernetes, at the end of the day, you know, it provides some networking, it provides some compute, it provides some storage concepts, but it doesn't solve those things. It relies on the ecosystem to solve it. My recommendation for Kubeflow is the same. So, you know, in the chat, someone asked, you know, what do we think about other companies borrowing our ideas? That's absolutely working as intended. We don't want to, you know, own anything. And I would always be very skeptical of people who are quote unquote open source, but the vast majority of content and contributions come from a single entity where they must make money off of, like, it's basically a pull through for other services and things like that. Again, I don't want to badmouth anyone, but you just gotta, like, you know, if your whole point to contributing is to pull through your, you know, your very large public whatever other services, then that's not ideal. You know, Kubeflow as a community and as a platform should solve the problem that Kubeflow solves and have clean interfaces so that you can have commercial offerings on top of Kubeflow or in partnership or whatever, knowing that Kubeflow is MIT licensed and available for everyone. So, you know, I just think, like, we should really try our best to stay inside this box of clean, easy to set up, easy to maintain, declarative, you know, ML infrastructure, and make it very easy to extend in whatever ways people want to for other projects or for commercial offerings.
And we did have one question that's pertinent to this session in the Q&A, and it's from Prasad. I believe that's how you say the name. They had a question that said, what do the founders think of companies, quote unquote, borrowing your ideas, but not building on top of Kubeflow or contributing to it? That's the loaded open source question of all, you know, projects out there. What do you think about people using it, borrowing it, but not contributing back?
I mean, I think that, I mean, I don't have any problem with that. I mean, I think, you know, that's the nature of the contract. I mean, we put an Apache license on there. You're free to do whatever you want. And I think the value prop of, like, open source and the commitment is, like, you can fork it and do whatever you want with it. And I think in many cases, forking is the right decision. You know, it allows for experimentation, differences of opinions, different business models to evolve. I think too often forking has a negative connotation. You know, so I'm fine with it.
Yeah, I totally agree. I would. So first, right, like Jeremy and I, nor anyone in the community invented most of these concepts, right? Like these were already out there in published papers and so on. We just happen to have an implementation that, you know, again, Jeremy did the vast majority of the hard work on. I was just, you know, PM hand waving. On top of that, you know, like, you know, it is absolutely working as intended. If someone else takes it and forks it and makes it specific in a, you know, in a way that solves a need that the general solution can't solve, absolutely, that is exactly what's designed. I will say, if you are a consumer who's looking to use something, you need to really go in eyes open. If you're going in to someone who solved this by forking it and keeping it closed source or not contributing back, you should expect, by and large, that's going to be the behavior of that community going forward. So they will continue to suck in new ideas. They won't contribute back. They may not like work with other partners and things like that. That could be okay for certain solutions. Just go in eyes wide open. We, on the other hand, you know, very actively give everything away and accept contributions from everywhere. And again, that's our philosophy. So,
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Jeremy.